Good morning. Welcome to Southminster Steinhauer United Church this morning. Welcome to this circle where we all seek to create a safe space for all. No matter who we are, we're welcome here in this circle. So welcome to each of us this morning. This, as I said, is a safe space. It's a safe space to be ourselves. It's a safe place to ask our questions. It's a safe space to explore the inner workings of our human experience. It's where we seek to find wisdom for our living, to strengthen our intentions, to live more closely to our highest values and our most worthy goals for our lives and our living. This is a place of building community, after all, so here we are together on this beautiful summer Sunday morning for those of us in this space, and as we recognize those who join with us throughout the week, online, and watching these videos, wherever we happen to be as we experience this, we're part of this community. We wish to acknowledge, of course, this land on which Southminster Steinhauer United Church sits. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Cree, the Blackfoot, the Nakota Sioux, the Denetah, and many others. Today, this place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work and play and make our home on this land. May our words symbolize the actions and the intentions that we all have to live in hope for strong relations and continued reconciliation. Today, in this gathering, we'll explore our quest for spirituality, to invite us into defining what that is for us, and acknowledging that we support one another while we endeavor to take on this lifelong undertaking. First, though, I think we have to enter into this time in a different way, not just with words from someone standing here, but with music and with singing, a way that expresses more than words alone can. So let's warm the spaces between us with a song that invites us to fully be present, that invites us to the life and the experience of community. Let's sing our way into this experience this morning.
Find the room for hope to enter. Find the frame where we are free. Clear the chaos and the clutter. Clear our eyes that we can see all the things that really matter. Be at peace and simply be. As community we travel, open to each other's pain. Let our loves and fears unravel, celebrate the space we gain. For deepest dreaming, there's a time for heart to care. In our spirits, lively scheming, there is always room to spare.
As we share them together, ask that you respond with the yellow responses. An underlying harmony, a delicate equilibrium built on the value of everything, binds together past, present, and future. Nothing and nobody stands alone. Nobody is apart from the law of interdependence. Lives are lived and died. The seasons flow from one to the other. Spirit and flesh are one. We are whole. Nobody stands alone. My life is linked to yours, and our common survival and living of our lives is tied to each other's, tied to the running water, tied to the animals and the earth herself. Nothing and nobody stands alone. This is the beginning of wisdom. It's better than wealth, more valuable than possessions. Awareness of it will change us forever. Nothing and nobody stands alone. As we open ourselves to the insights within us and look for wisdom, we keep aware to wonder, to beauty, and to mystery. May we affirm that in this circle, nothing and nobody stands alone. We light this candle on our center table as we do each and every week as a reminder that we are all lights in the world. That as we learn who we truly are, as we awaken to the awe and wonder of this world, of our existence, of our place in the midst of it all, that we may see ourselves as lights in the world. As a wise teacher 2,000 years ago has said, we are all a light. And as we seek to discover it and allow it to shine, may this candle remind us of our power and our strength, our inner light to guide the way forward. Let's now speak our intentions. Let's verbalize our hopes and our commitments to ourselves and the world. In other words, let's pray together. In the midst of the ordinary, it's crucial that we find and create soul space, the place or time in which our hearts might intertwine with hope and stir our minds to think on broader, higher, more valuable things. Life strings moments one upon another, and we might see them as drops of dew trickling into nothingness, or we might live them into pearls with which we might adorn the world. May we embrace the space that we create, and may we find goodness in what happens when we open ourselves to awareness, to creativity, and to the potential in us to find the wisdom and strength we need. We pray as those who share a common journey. May it be. We don't have a carpet this morning, but we have a time for all ages. I thought I would read from a book entitled Mindful Panda. Oh, I don't have a title page. Mindful Monkey, Happy Panda. The story's by Lauren Alderfer. Illustrations by Carrie Lee McLean. It's a tiny little story which is very useful for children, but not only children. One late afternoon, as Monkey was walking home from a long day at school, Monkey came across Panda sitting serenely in a thicket of bamboo. "You always seem so happy and peaceful," said Monkey. "You could say that," said Happy Panda with a little smile. "What do you do to be so happy and so peaceful?" "I walk, I work, I read, I eat, I play, and I rest." "I walk, I work, I read, I eat, I play, and I rest too, but I am not quite as happy as you are," said Monkey. "That seems true," said Happy Panda as he looked at Monkey. "So what do you think about when you do these things?" "Well," said Monkey, "when I walk, I also think about doing chores. When I do chores, I also think about reading. When I read, I also think about eating. When I eat, I also think about playing. And when I play, I also think about resting. When I rest, I also think about walking. "Ah," said Panda, "it seems like your monkey mind is jumping from one thing to another, always to somewhere other than here, to something other than what you're doing right now." "Well, of course it does," said Monkey. "Isn't that what everyone's mind does?" "Well," said Panda, "when I walk, I'm just walking. When I work, I'm just working. When I read, I'm just reading. When I eat, I am just eating." Yum. "When I play, I'm just playing. And when I rest, I'm just resting." "True happiness," said Panda gently, "comes from bringing all of your attention to whatever you're doing. There's no need to think about what happened yesterday because it's gone. It's over, it's done. And there's no need to worry about tomorrow because it's not here yet. But today's all around us. Bringing your mind back to this moment right here over and over again is the secret." "Oh, I get it," said Monkey. "You mean your mind is full of the present. Your mind is full of right now. That's definitely how I want to be." And at that very moment, Monkey started to practice mindfulness. But perhaps this is a story about pandas and monkeys. May we find wisdom for our living. This is a reading from one of the accounts of Jesus' life from the Gospel of Matthew. And it's part of a section in that writing that deals with the dichotomy between the things that were taught in the religious tradition of the day and perhaps the not just common sense, but also the innate spiritual wisdom that one finds within themselves, and how sometimes they do not go hand in hand. And Jesus had a way in his storytelling of pointing out these places of conflict. One Sabbath, Jesus was strolling with his disciples through a field of ripe grain. The disciples were hungry, and so they pulled the heads off some of the grain and started munching on them. Some Pharisees reported them to Jesus, their teacher, saying, "Your disciples are breaking the Sabbath rules." Jesus said, "Really? Didn't you ever read what David and his companions did in the scriptures when they were hungry? How they would enter the sanctuary and eat fresh bread off the altar, bread that no one but priests were allowed to eat? And didn't you ever read also that priests carrying out their temple duties seem to break Sabbath rules all the time, and it's not held against them? There is far more at stake here than religion. If you had any idea what this scripture meant, I prefer a flexible heart to an inflexible ritual, you wouldn't condemn the guiltless. This is a story of compassionate living. May we find wisdom for our living. Our next piece of wisdom, not so much a reading as a story. I want to share with you the story of an artist named Peter von Tiesenhausen. Peter von Tiesenhausen is an artist from northern Alberta, and in 1997, with the help of his chainsaw, he sculpted 5 figures out of local spruce and pine. He took them to the southern Alberta prairie and lit them on fire, wanting them to look scorched and worn. Tiesenhausen then displayed the 5 figures on a rooftop in the city of Calgary as a way for him to declare to the oil and gas industry that there was more going on there than the extraction of resources. As if that weren't an interesting enough story, it gets more intriguing. After 6 weeks on display, Tiesenhausen thought of other plans for these figures, and he put them in the back of his pickup truck. And in his words, he says, "Just on a lark, we stood them up in the back of the pickup truck. They were ridiculously tall, and their effect on other people was all across the board, from doubled over in laughter to horror. So I became very conscious all of a sudden of where I was and that these figures could speak." For the next several years, von Tiesenhausen toured across Canada with the Watchers as unsuspecting Canadians witnessed and added to the narrative of the piece. From the prairies to a garden in Hamilton to spending months in Newfoundland to a Coast Guard icebreaker in the Northwest Territories, across every province and territory of the country. In 2001, he visited Merdina Marshall, a Mi'kmaq elder of the Eskasoni Reserve in Nova Scotia. They had been known as the forest figures. I didn't really name them, he said. I didn't really want them named, but upon first sight, Marshall simply said, "Oh, the Watchers are here." A name that stuck. These figures sit now bolted to the rock in Newfoundland known to the locals as the Beamers. They stare out to sea watching. A replica made of melted down steel from engine blocks sits rusting in downtown Toronto, watching. What are they watching for, Tiesenhausen has been asked. His response, "I don't try to tell people what they're watching. I don't know what's right or what's wrong or what's smart or what's stupid. I'm just as aware as I can be, and I want people to be as aware as they can be of what's around them." that the place you live in is so friggin' magical. In this story of an artist and his art, may we find wisdom for our living. It seems like ever since we've been able to differentiate ourselves from the world as a species, we have wanted in some way or another connection. If you can imagine with me to our very early ancestors, they would have formed themselves into groups for various reasons, for the protection of their group, for food, for hunting, for protection, for keeping their group and their species alive. But we look back and we think that ever since our worldview has recognized that there's something different out there, we've wanted the safety and the security of connection to protect us from that. Whether it was a tribe we didn't know, or a world that's bigger than we knew, or a question that couldn't be answered, we had to name that and differentiate it from what we knew. And at those moments, the world does become very dual, doesn't it? It becomes very split into two. It becomes what we know and what we don't know. The familiar and the other. And I think even though millennia has gone by in our human evolution, we still live in that dichotomy in some ways. How do we interact with, and how do we have a relationship between what we think we know to be true and that which we don't know, the other, the unknown? We have a more pleasant word for that other stuff. When we're feeling charitable and when it's not so threatening, we call it mystery. When it is threatening and when it is scary, we call it a lot of other names, but they're not as nice as mystery. But through it all, there is a desire for connection. For whatever reason, through our history, here we are living right now, in our lives right now, and it's still, we can put our finger on a desire for connection. Each of us needs connection in some way or another. The reasons may have changed from our primordial kind of ancestors. Perhaps we don't need them to help us hunt. But in some ways we do. I mean, that food has to show up at the grocery store somehow, right? So we need each other, and in various different ways we desire a connection. That desire for connection we can call spirituality. It's one definition of spirituality. Our desire to connect with each other, to have others help us live out our lives. For various reasons, not just physical, but emotional and psychological. We need others to help us get through our living. Now, if we were to ask the question, how do we know that we're a spiritual person? If I were to ask each of you that, how do you know you're a spiritual person? Some of you might answer, well, I don't know. And some of you might say, that's a trick question. Or some of you might say, if I was really going to think about it, maybe some of the things I do might exemplify that spirituality. I come here on a Sunday morning, or I journal, or I meditate, or I practice yoga, or I like to take walks in nature, and I read books about spirituality, or we exercise, or we sing. And there's a whole gamut of things that we do that express our spirituality. And it's really hard to get at what spirituality means without acknowledging, first and foremost, that it's really hard to talk about spirituality without talking about the things we do. Not impossible, but really difficult, because we just are programmed that way. We think, how am I spiritual? I'm spiritual by the things I do, or by the way I go about things. Yet if we're going to get to the heart of the matter, we have to try, perhaps, to answer that question without talking about the things we do. A spiritual writer speaks of all the practices we do in our spirituality this way. When the oak tree feels its roots in the earth, its connectedness with the earth, it is not practicing a technique, a religion, or a spirituality. That is the oak tree's natural state, to feel connected to what's around it. If only we could be as easy to please as an oak tree. There are many values to spiritual disciplines, but there are also many dangers. And if the tool you use, for example, is hiking or walking in nature or through a city park or wherever, you'll do that regularly because it means something to you and because it's helpful to you. You see it as helpful to you. And if that's how you know you're being spiritual, then that's great. If you're a prayerful person, then praying in whatever way that takes shape for you, when you're doing that, you know you're making connections the way you feel you need to. Those are two examples. What happens then when we can't get out to walk? What happens when we fall out of that prayer that we're used to doing? It's very easy at those moments to then tell ourselves that our spirituality isn't there. And we start condemning ourselves. Daggone it, I haven't gotten out for a walk in 2 weeks. What's wrong with me? Why can I not get to yoga class like I used to? Or I haven't picked up a book that's fed my spirit in weeks. I just don't have time. These are all the things we do to ourselves. We start condemning ourselves. These things we do don't define our spirituality, though. And it's difficult for us to just put a pause on that and actually say that sentence to ourselves. These things we do not define our spirituality. They may express it in ways that we find helpful or enjoyable, but they are not our spirituality. If doing them connects us to the place of knowing, then of course we'd want to do them. If not, then they're merely a means to feel like we're doing the right things, in which case they're probably not doing us any good anyway. That's the situation of us not being as the oak tree is, in a natural state of connection. That's us grasping and yearning and wanting and trying. When there are so many labels out there with what it means to be spiritual, it's easy to tie ourselves to the labels. Going to church or donating to causes or giving to outreach projects or journaling or yoga, these are all labels. And the sooner we recognize that, the sooner we can begin to explore who it is and what it is that's behind all that. And I suspect the question behind all of it is, who are we? I want to tell you a Zen story. As in most Zen stories, there's a master and a student. So the master says, no, the master was asked, what is spirituality? And so the master says, spirituality is that which succeeds in bringing one to inner transformation. The student replies, but if I apply the traditional methods handed down by the masters, is that not spirituality? That's what I've been told. The master replies, it's not spirituality if it doesn't perform its function for you. A blanket is no longer a blanket if it doesn't keep you warm. The student says, so what does this mean? The master says, people change and needs change. So what once was spirituality may not be any longer, and what once was not spirituality may be so for you. Aren't stories great that make you go, what? Wait, what? There's no one meaning to that Zen story, but I certainly take away from that spirituality is a tool to know ourselves, a tool that must continue working at the task of us knowing ourselves. And if it's not doing that, then it's not the tool we need in our lives. So, knowing ourselves is a tricky business, and I think that's why spirituality is a tricky business, because we say we want spirituality, and yet at the same time we also say knowing ourselves is a bit uncomfortable. We separate ourselves a little bit from that, don't we? We don't really want to know every part of ourselves. At least not on the surface and all the time, because that's a lot, and there's only so much of ourselves we can take, right? I mean, really, we hide a lot of ourselves because we know it's there, and we're just as happy saying, yep, it's there, I'll put it back in this corner, thank you very much, it can stay there. We like to lift up the parts of ourselves that we like, that we allow only certain parts through that we want to know, that we want to express, and the rest can go away. In some ways, that's kind of the double-edged sword, pardon me for mixing metaphors, of the spiritual life. When we light this candle and we say that we're all lights to the world, the light shines on everything is our hope, and the light helps us to make our lives better and our world better. It also illumines those things we wish would stay in the dark. In this post-Christian world we live in, some would say post-God world, the only one accountable for me is me. There is no supernatural God out there somewhere that will protect me and reward me and punish me and bless me. I'm accountable to myself and to the world and to my community. The one who will condemn me and bless me is me. The one that will expose me and shelter me is me. The one who will first and foremost love me and hate me is me. Which isn't to say that we don't live in a world rich in mystery and unknown that many of us may call God. But we do live in a world where the beauty of spirituality is that we can own what we discover, and we can own it deeply ourselves. We do that here in this community. We own our own obligation to be about our inner well-being, our own ability to live in accord with our inner values. That we are responsible for that. We can't tack that on anyone else. We may need help doing it, but we own the responsibility for living our lives the way they need to be lived. Do y'all know the name, did I just say do y'all? I meant do you all know the spiritual writer Eckhart Tolle? He gets a little bit deep sometimes, but he did say something interesting that I'd like to share about spirituality. Well, he's always talking about spirituality, but specifically about how he defines what spirituality is. He starts out by saying something that I think many have said before. Spirituality is not about having a particular belief structure or subscribing to a set of thoughts. We get that. It's discovering a dimension within yourself that's either deeper or higher than this continuous movement of your brain and your thinking. So he's channeling the panda rather than the monkey, right? To experience presence where you are alert and conscious without having to think about it. Then he says something that is really interesting to me. And I'm going to try to describe it to you in words that we can understand. He says, life consists of sense perceptions, how we see the world, feel the world, sense, our senses, and thoughts and emotions. All of these things together, put them together, and he says, that's my life. But there is more than this, he says. We have the ability, on top of all those things, to actually recognize them. We have the ability somehow to recognize the thoughts we're having. We can perceive what we're seeing. We can recognize that we're feeling something emotional. And he said it could be called consciousness, something that enables all these things to be recognized. We often don't know it's there. Perhaps we could call that awareness. And he says this is the spiritual dimension. Consciousness is the space within which our senses and our thoughts and our emotions exist. Which is interesting enough, but then he gives a concrete example which I think is very helpful. He says, look at the room you're in. How do you describe this room? Is it the furniture? Is it the walls? Is it the floor, the ceiling, the lighting? Is it the occupants in this room? He says we can describe this room in all kinds of ways that talk about how it is and what it's about. But the essence of this room isn't those things. It's the space in which all those things can be placed. And it's often overlooked and taken for granted. He's suggesting that this room isn't about the physical things that we're seeing, it's about the space in which all those things exist. Well, maybe. But his point is the same is true of our awareness, of our spirituality, that there is what happens and that there is the space in which it happens. Our consciousness, the essence of who we are, is where everything that we know happens, our thoughts, our emotions, our senses. And it's that where he says we can be the most peaceful, the most productive, and where we can live from. So that's a definition of spirituality. Maybe deeper than many of us can cope with on a daily basis. But I think we sing about that place, don't we? When we sung the first song and we sang, "Come and find the quiet center," well, what's the quiet center? Is it the place that is deeper than our thoughts and our emotions and our feelings and what we see and experience? There's something deeper than all the distractions. When we sing about that, when we talk about it, we're talking about some part of us, some place in us. And I guess I would say we're talking about the real us. We're talking about who am I at my heart. That's where I need to go. That tells me to get with it, Chris. Start talking sense. So, this story from 2,000 years ago that in the Jesus tradition about his friends eating grain on the Sabbath gets at this difference between kind of what is on the surface and what is deeper. Some friends of Jesus pluck some grain on the holy day, and religious custom says, well, don't expend effort on that day, it's not allowed. And there's a prevailing cultural understanding of the purpose of that law. The purpose of the law was that there should be a day of rest, that no one should have to work on that day, so don't do any work. And then suddenly that law becomes interpreted rigidly, and all of a sudden, if you're hungry, you can't pluck some grain off the bloody stalk. It was and is easy to see the commandments, the practices that set a group apart from another. It's easy to see those as a strategy and equation, and it's easy for us 2,000 years forward to criticize those and to say, well, that was foolish. Of course they can eat grain, but we have our own ways of doing this in our own time. We have our own rigidity. We have our own rules that we feel we must follow and that sometimes don't make a whole lot of sense, that keep us often from our innermost sense of what is right. Somehow into that story, an enlightened one, Jesus, who's found this awareness, this place to see deeper and beyond that surface, says that, well, this same journey that we've been talking about, this life, is really about giving and taking what's needed, when it's needed, in order to grow and to be whole. It's about feeding our minds and our bodies and our spirits. It's about common sense. If you're hungry, eat. And he says these words, there is more at stake here than religion. More than rule following, more than the surface, but about honoring who we really are, what is right to us. What calling is there that's calling us to the best of our humanity that we just have to follow? We've all been in situations like that where we say, if I'm going to be the person that I am, I must do this. So it's a matter of It's a matter of internal affairs, not external. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. It's not what's happening on the outside. The grain, whether we follow the rules or not, what others might think, following a roadmap to happiness or fulfillment, those are external affairs. Those are things that keep our world in some kind of order, and I'm not saying they're not important, but they're not a spiritual question. Those are external affairs. Spirituality, as Jesus taught, as all the enlightened and wise ones have taught, is about what's happening on the inside. How are we finding the inner space, the inner peace, the inner calm, the inner awareness in order to live in harmony and community with all that surrounds us? How will we make decisions about eating or relationships or how to spend our time or what work to do? Not just by how the externals look, but by what's going on inside. Peter von Tiesenhausen, that Canadian artist, was unwilling to define what his figures were watching for. Artists often do this, right? You ask an artist what that painting means. Well, I don't know. What do you think it means, right? Perhaps in this case with these figures that he sculpted, for some they are the watchers, watching for something. Maybe for others they are forest figures that remind us of the land and its value and its importance. For others, we can again quote the artist who says, "I can't try to tell people what to think, what anything means. My goal is just to be as aware as I can be. And I want people to be aware that the place they live in is so friggin' magical." His words. That's also a message of someone who understands and lives a spirituality, an awareness, a consciousness, that there's something underneath. There's something that gives meaning to our lives, that connects us to ourselves. So my message today is really just one of encouragement, I guess, for us to continue the process of living in tune with our own selves and being able to find the space where we can do that. Not just the room, but the real space. Where in us is there something speaking? And are we listening? To find out who we are and use whatever tools we can to get at that work. Whatever that is for you, the fact that we can walk together to do it is important. To share with each other how we do it is important. That state of connectedness, that is the spirituality we're after. We talk a lot about connecting with each other. That's important in community. But let's remember that everything else can come and go, but our spirituality is our connection, first and foremost, with ourselves. To know ourselves deeply, and to let that place speak. That's our goal, and that's our hope, and that's our place where we grow and live from. So may we live to make it so, in so many ways. to stand, and we're going to sing a song as we celebrate together today. Not only into this day do we go, but into this week and into this life that we live. We offer each other the gift of knowing ourselves, of knowing deeply the work and the beauty of our spirituality. May we take our lights into our lives and into the world. Empty words, no rote platitudes, no wishes for magic easy fixes, no tricks or hoops, no dense dogmatic truths, no secrets to all of life's questions, just